The valley has a reputation that predates the body. Locals in Bergen, Norway, call it Isdalen, the ice valley, even before the events of November 29th, 1970. This geological gash in the landscape was known as a place where people went to die. It is a treacherous stretch of terrain, shadowed by the looming bulk of Mount Ulriken, a place where the sun struggles to penetrate the dense canopy of gray clouds that roll in from the North Sea. It is damp, it is cold, and on this particular Sunday afternoon, it is silent. There is a specific kind of silence that occurs in deep wilderness. It is not the absence of sound, but the absence of signal. There is wind moving through the scree. There is the drip of condensation falling from the moss-covered granite. But there is no hum of electricity, no engine noise, no human frequency. Into this static steps a university professor and his 2 young daughters. They are on a hiking trip, moving along the older trails that snake through the rocky debris. The time is roughly 1:15 in the afternoon. The light is already failing. In this latitude, at this time of year, the day is a brief, gray interruption of the night. The first indication that something is wrong is not visual. It is olfactory. The air in Isdalen usually smells of wet stone, decaying pine needles, and the metallic tang of impending snow. But as the family rounds a bend near a scree slope, the wind shifts. It carries a scent that triggers a primal, reptilian warning in the human brain. It is the smell of burning meat. Beneath that, a sharper chemical note. Kerosene. One of the daughters stops. She points toward a cluster of rocks off the main path. To the uninitiated eye, the object lying among the boulders looks like a discarded mannequin. It is charred black, twisted into a shape that defies comfortable anatomy. The professor approaches, perhaps hoping it is debris, perhaps hoping it is a trick of the light. It is neither. It is a woman. She is lying on her back, though her body has contorted into what forensic pathologists call the pugilistic attitude. This is a biological reaction to extreme heat. The muscles contract and shorten as the moisture boils out of the tissue, pulling the limbs inward. Her arms are raised in front of her chest, fists clenched, resembling a boxer protecting their face. But there is no face left to protect. The fire has erased her features, scrubbing her identity down to bone and carbon. The professor herds his children away. They retreat down the mountain, back to the world of the living, back to the nearest police station in Bergen. This is the start of the file. This is the moment the anomaly enters the system. When the police arrive, the sun has set. They work under the harsh, artificial glare of floodlights, powered by generators. The noise of the machinery bounces off the valley walls, disrupting the silence. Carl Haver Oz, a police lawyer who is among the first on the scene, notes the atmosphere immediately. It feels staged. It feels ritualistic. The scene is a freeze frame of violence, yet it possesses a strange, clinical order. The woman is not just a body dumped in the woods. She is the center of a debris field that feels calculated. Let us examine the inventory of items found immediately surrounding the corpse. There is a bottle of scent, halvard liqueur, 2 plastic water bottles melted by the heat, a silver spoon, a glass that contains traces of some liquid, and perhaps most strangely, a plastic cup. These items are not scattered randomly, as one would expect from a struggle. They are placed. The woman herself lies in a self-contained burn zone. The fire did not spread to the surrounding brush. It consumed her, and only her. The ground beneath her is scorched, but the dampness of the valley contained the blaze. She burned hot, and she burned fast. As the investigators move closer, the high strangeness of the case begins to resolve into focus. The sensory details of the corpse present immediate contradictions. The front of her body is severely burned. Her face, her hair, her chest, her knees. But her back is untouched. She was facing the fire, or the fire was placed upon her. She is dressed in clothing that suggests a certain elegance, disjointed from the rugged terrain. She is not wearing hiking gear. She is wearing synthetic fabrics, lighter clothes, better suited for a city street than a frozen Norwegian valley. But it is when the investigators look at the jewelry that the sense of unease deepens. A gold watch, a pair of earrings, a ring. They are not on her body. The jewelry has been removed and placed on a rock next to her. It is a precise arrangement. It looks like a bedside table. It looks like she prepared for bed, took off her valuables, and laid them out before lying down in the fire. This detail breaks the narrative of a simple murder. A robber takes the gold. A maniac scatters it, who removes their watch and places it gently on a stone before dying. The police photograph everything. The flashbulbs pop, illuminating the blackened figure against the gray rocks. Each photo is a data point, capturing a scene that refuses to make sense. Under the body, they find a hat. It has traces of petrol on it. They find a burnt passport, the plastic cover fused into an illegible lump. The physical evidence is degrading rapidly in the damp air. The body is transported to the Gads Institute for Pathology. The autopsy begins the next morning. If the crime scene was a corrupted file, the autopsy is where the code completely breaks down. The medical examiner finds soot in her lungs. This is a critical distinction. It means she was alive when the fire started. She breathed in the smoke. She felt the heat. But then, the toxicology report returns. Her stomach contains approximately 50 to 70 phenomenal sleeping pills. They are not fully digested. The concentration in her blood is enough to cause a coma, likely enough to kill her on its own. Consider the timeline this implies. She swallowed a lethal dose of sedatives. Then she walked into the valley, or she was carried. The mechanics of the overdose contradict the mechanics of the fire. A woman slipping into a chemical coma does not typically have the motor function to arrange her jewelry on a rock or set herself ablaze. There is also a bruise on the right side of her neck, a blunt force trauma. It could be from a fall. It could be a karate chop. It could be the handle of a gun. The data points are conflicting. Carbon monoxide in the blood suggests suicide by fire. The sleeping pills suggest suicide by overdose. The blow to the neck suggests homicide. The placement of the jewelry suggests a ritual. And then there is the clothing. As the forensic technicians begin to strip the remaining unburned layers of fabric from the body, they search for identification. A laundry tag, a brand name, a size label, anything that can trace this woman back to a store, a city, a life. They check the collar of the blouse. They check the waistband of the trousers. They check the lining of the coat. Nothing. Every single label has been cut out. This is not wear and tear. This is surgical removal. The tags have been snipped away with scissors, leaving only the fraying threads where the brand names used to be. It is a deliberate erasure of origin. This detail changes the scope of the investigation instantly. A suicidal woman might want to die. She might even want to disappear. But to methodically remove every manufacturing tag from every piece of clothing, that speaks to a lifetime of discipline. That is tradecraft. The police widen their search of the immediate area. They comb the moss and the scree. They find the remnants of a pair of rubber boots. They too have been scrubbed of identity. The Isdal Woman, as she is now designated, is a ghost in the machine. She has no face. She has no fingerprints that match any database in Norway. She has no name. She has only a body that has been destroyed 3 different ways: by poison, by force, and by fire. The silence of the valley has followed her into the morgue. As the first day of the investigation closes, the authorities are left with a collection of objects that feel like they belong to a stage play rather than a crime scene. The silver spoon, the liqueur, the jewelry on the rock. It is as if she dropped out of the sky, or rather as if she was placed there, arranged with care and deleted. The media begins to catch wind of the discovery. The headlines start to circulate. The Isdal Woman. The mystery is public now, but the true depth of the rabbit hole is yet to be revealed. The police do not yet know about the suitcases. They do not know about the codes. They do not know about the multiple identities, the wigs, or the cryptic movements across Europe. For now, there is only the body on the slab and the lingering smell of kerosene that refuses to wash out of the clothes of the men who carried her down the mountain. The glitch is absolute. A woman who exists only in the moment of her death. A file with no metadata. But in the ashes, there is one final, quiet detail that the investigators missed in those first chaotic hours. A detail that suggests this was not just a death, but a transmission that was terminated abruptly. Deep in the lining of the unburned section of her coat, hidden from casual view, is a small, unremarkable defect in the stitching. It looks like a repair, but when examined closely, it is not a repair. It is a modification, a pocket that shouldn't be there. And inside that pocket, the fabric is stretched, as if it had held something heavy and rectangular for a very long time. Whatever was in that pocket is gone. The silence of the Isdalen Valley is heavy, but the silence of that empty pocket is deafening. The erasure was successful, or so it seemed. The transition from a crime scene to a laboratory usually brings clarity. The chaotic visuals of the scene, the rain, the mud, the burned heather, are stripped away, replaced by the sterile, uncompromising light of the autopsy table and the forensics bench. We expect the science to resolve the mystery. We expect the biology to speak when the victim cannot. In the case of the woman found in Isdalen, the science did speak, but it spoke in contradictions. As the investigation moved from the valley floor to the Haukeland University Hospital, the narrative did not sharpen. It fractured. The physical evidence began to exhibit what can only be described as resolution errors, details that, when viewed closely, refused to render a coherent image of a human life. The first anomaly was not biological, but material. It was the systematic, almost industrial erasure of her identity from the objects she carried. When police located her 2 suitcases in a luggage locker at the Bergen railway station, distinguished only by a fingerprint found on a pair of sunglasses that matched the body, they opened a capsule of pure void. Inside were clothes, quality garments, wool, synthetic blends, leather. But every single piece of data that could link a garment to a store, a manufacturer, or a country of origin had been surgically removed. This was not the work of a nervous drifter tearing off tags with their teeth. The labels were cut with precision. The stitching where the tags had once been was undisturbed, leaving only the faintest ghost of a hem. Consider the level of paranoia required to execute this. It is one thing to destroy a passport. It is another to sit in a hotel room, night after night, and meticulously pick the gold foil, branding off a tube of eczema cream. That is what investigators found: a tube of Betnevat ointment, a prescription medication, scraped clean. The name of the prescribing doctor and the date, usually stamped into the label, were gone. The metal tube itself was scarred by the tool used to erase the text. This is a technical failure of human behavior. It defies the logic of self-preservation. If she were running from someone, she would need to blend in. Carrying objects that have been violently scrubbed of their markings draws the eye. It signals intent. It screams that there is a secret. It suggests that the woman was not afraid of being caught with a weapon, but was terrified of being caught with a history. Then there is the matter of the cipher. Deep within the lining of the suitcase, police found a blue writing pad. It appeared blank, but under the application of graphite powder and oblique light, impressions emerged. Not a diary, not a suicide note, but a grid. Columns of dates, codes, LAPCG. Cryptographers from the Norwegian military eventually broke the code, but the solution only deepened the glitch. The codes corresponded to travel routes: Paris, Hamburg, Oslo, Bergen. The dates matched passport stamps, but the pattern was erratic. She was crisscrossing borders with a frequency that triggered no alarms in 1970, yet seems impossible by modern standards. She was changing identities between train stations. The investigation revealed she used at least 8 different passports, 8 distinct identities, including Finella Lorck, Claudia Tilt, and Genevieve Lancier. The technical anomaly here is the quality of the documents. In 1970, passport control was manual, but it was not blind. These were not crude forgeries. They were functional documents that allowed her to move through the ironclad bureaucracy of Cold War Europe without friction. To maintain 8 identities requires more than paper. It requires a fracturing of the self. Witnesses at the hotels where she stayed described her as foreign. Yet she spoke broken English, German, and Flemish. She would request to change rooms frequently, always demanding a room with a balcony, always paying in cash. She would move heavy furniture in front of the doors. This behavior suggests a woman under siege. Yet the items in the suitcase included wigs and non-prescription glasses. These are the tools of theater, not survival. The juxtaposition of high-level tradecraft, the passports, the cipher, with the almost amateurish disguises, creates a friction in the profile. It is like looking at a photograph where the foreground is in focus, but the background belongs to a different image entirely. The most jarring disconnect, however, occurred on the autopsy table. The pathologist, Dr. Geertsen, was tasked with determining the cause of death. The body was carbonized. The assumption was that she had been murdered and then burned to destroy the evidence. But the toxicology report returned a finding that broke the timeline. Her stomach contained approximately 50 to 70 particles of phenamyl, a brand of sleeping pill containing phenobarbital. The sheer volume suggests a lethal dose, enough to incapacitate her within minutes. Yet her blood contained high concentrations of carbon monoxide. This is the physiological glitch. Carbon monoxide is only absorbed into the blood if the subject is breathing while the fire is burning. The Isdal woman was alive when she burned. She had enough sedative in her system to kill a horse. Yet she was breathing deeply enough to inhale the smoke of her own immolation. Furthermore, there was a bruise on her neck, a hematoma consistent with a karate chop or a blunt force strike. The sequence of events becomes physically impossible to reconstruct linearly. If she took the pills voluntarily, she would have fallen asleep before the fire could be lit, unless she lit it herself immediately. If she was forced to take the pills, the assailant would have had to wait for them to dissolve. Yet, the bruise suggests a struggle. The soot in her lungs proves she was screaming or gasping in the middle of the inferno. The pills in her stomach prove she should have been comatose. The biology refuses to align. It is as if two different deaths happened to the same body at the exact same moment. And then the teeth. In forensic archaeology, teeth are the black box. They survive fire, they survive decay, and they map a person's history better than DNA. The Isdal woman's jaw was a unique landscape of gold and porcelain. 14 of her teeth had been restored or replaced. The work was distinctive. The bridges were gold, constructed with a technique specific to Central Europe, likely Germany or Austria, during the 1940s or 50s. The dentistry was expensive. It was the mouth of someone who had been cared for, someone with resources. Police sketched the jaw. They photographed the gold bridges. They sent these images to every dental association in Norway, then Europe, then Interpol. They published the dental profile in major newspapers. Thousands of dentists looked at those charts. In a world before digital databases, the dental community was a tight network. Gold work of that magnitude is memorable. A dentist remembers a mouth full of gold, the way an architect remembers a skyscraper they designed. The result was silence. 0 matches, 0 inquiries. This is the impossible detail that lingers longest. You can scrape the name off a tube of cream. You can burn a passport. You can cut the tags off a sweater. But you cannot erase the records of a dozen complex medical procedures performed over 2 decades. Unless the records never existed, or unless the person who performed the work was operating outside the public system. The teeth suggest a woman who was wealthy enough to afford gold, yet invisible enough to leave no paper trail in any medical archive in the Western world. It implies she was created, not born. The deeper the police looked, the more the context dissolved. A spoon found in the luggage carried a fingerprint, but the spoon was just a spoon. A matchbox found at the scene came from a sex shop in Germany, a detail that feels like a planted texture, a bit of grit to throw off the narrative. We are left with a body that is a collection of errors, a woman who travels with 8 names but no history, a victim who dies of fire and poison simultaneously, a mouth full of gold that no doctor will claim. The investigation in the lab was supposed to narrow the possibilities. Instead, it eliminated the only plausible explanations. It wasn't a robbery. She had money. It wasn't a simple suicide. The mechanics of the fire and the bruise rule that out. It wasn't a standard homicide. The lack of sexual assault and the meticulous removal of identity suggest something far colder. By the time the autopsy report was filed, the Isdal Woman had become less of a person and more of an artifact, an impossible object dropped into the wet heather of Bergen, seemingly designed to break the tools used to analyze it. But amidst the burnt clothing and the melted plastic, there was one final, quiet anomaly, a detail that didn't require a microscope, but simply a calendar. It was the gap, the time that was missing, the hours where she simply ceased to exist before reappearing in the valley of death. The most haunting aspect of an unsolved case is not the violence. It is the administration of the aftermath. It is the paperwork. When you open the digital archives of the Bergen police from 1970 and 1971, you expect to find a chaotic scramble for the truth. You expect to see a widening net. Instead, what you find is a meticulously documented dead end, a bureaucratic shutting of doors. We have spoken of the body in the valley. We have spoken of the objects in the suitcases. Now we must look at the silence that followed them. In standard forensic investigations, evidence acts as a thread. You pull it, and it unravels a knot. In the Isdal case, every thread was cut. This was not accidental. This was not the result of the elements or the passage of time. This was a deliberate, engineered silence. Consider the fingerprints, or rather the lack of them. The woman traveled with multiple suitcases. She stayed in hotels. She handled check-in forms, currency, bottles of liqueur, and plastic spoons. Yet, when the police dusted the objects found in the lockers at the Bergen train station, they found nothing. I want you to visualize the physical act required to achieve this. This is not something that happens by chance. To leave no latent prints on a pair of sunglasses or a bottle of prescription lotion requires a systematic wiping down of every surface one touches. It suggests a life lived in a constant state of sterilization. When the police examined the blue enamel teapot she carried, it was clean. When they examined the flask of kirsch, it was clean. The investigation hit its first vertical wall here. Identification usually comes from the friction of existence. We leave pieces of ourselves on everything we touch. The Isdal Woman did not. She glided through the world without friction. The only fingerprint found was on the lens of a pair of sunglasses, a partial print that matched the body in the morgue. It proved ownership, but it did not provide an identity. Then came the cipher. In the lining of the black suitcase, investigators found a writing pad. On the first page, a series of blue ink codes, rows of numbers and letters. To the modern eye, looking at the scan on a high-definition monitor, it looks like the raw data of a corrupted file. Police cryptographers cracked it quickly. This was not the Enigma machine. It was a simple substitution and shorthand. The codes corresponded to dates and locations. 022, 028p, October 22nd to 28th, Paris. For a moment, the room must have felt electric. Here was her timeline. Here was the map. But as the investigators traced the route, the excitement curdled into frustration. The code did not reveal a mission. It did not reveal a contact. It simply revealed a travelogue. She went to Paris. She went to Hamburg. She went to Oslo. She went to Bergen. The data led everywhere, and therefore it led nowhere. The team sent telex messages to police departments in every city mentioned. They checked hotel registries for the dates in the code. They found her. They found her aliases: Fenella Lork, Claudia Tilt, Genevieve Lancier. But here is the specific texture of this dead end. The aliases led to nothing. The passports used to check into these hotels were never found. The passport numbers she wrote on the registration forms were fake. They were mathematically valid numbers, implying she knew the algorithm used to generate Belgian and French passport numbers, but they belonged to no one. The digital archaeologist looks at these registration cards today and sees a loop. The handwriting is distinctive, looping, confident, European. But the content is a void. She listed her profession as antique dealer or decorator. Safe, boring professions that explain travel but require no specific office. The investigation then turned to the one thing that cannot be easily altered: the body itself, specifically the teeth. The autopsy revealed distinct dental work: 14 fillings, several gold crowns, a bridge in the lower jaw. This was expensive, specific work. The gold was of a purity not used in Scandinavia. The technique was distinct to Central Europe. The Norwegian police did something unprecedented for the time. They published photographs of the woman's teeth in dental journals across Europe. They sent descriptions to thousands of dentists in Germany, France, and Belgium. This is usually where the match happens. A dentist recognizes their own handiwork. A bridge is a sculpture. The artist remembers the curve. There was zero response. Thousands of letters sent. Silence returned. It was as if she had been treated by a phantom dentist in a phantom city. The specific composition of the gold pointed to the region around Nuremberg. But without a record, the gold was just metal. By January 1971, the investigation room in Bergen was filling up with reports that said negative. Negative match on fingerprints. Negative match on dental records. Negative match on missing persons reports. And then the strangest silence of all occurred. The silence of the authorities. 3 weeks after the body was found, the tone of the investigation shifted. Initially, it was a murder inquiry. The blunt force trauma to the neck, the soot in the lungs, the bizarre position of the body, everything pointed to a homicide. But as the calendar turned to 1971, the narrative began to be rewritten. The police chief held a press conference. He suggested that the woman was mentally unstable. He emphasized the sleeping pills found in her stomach. He began to steer the massive ship of the investigation toward a verdict of suicide. This is the moment where the digital trail becomes erratic. If you look at the scanned documents from February 1971, you can see the conclusion being forced. The logic becomes tortured. To accept the suicide theory, you have to accept that this woman traveled to a remote scree valley, swallowed 50 phenomenal sleeping pills, waited for them to dissolve, and then, while incapacitating herself, managed to set herself on fire with a level of ferocity that incinerated the front of her body, but left her back untouched. It is a physical impossibility. The toxicology report stated she had enough phenobarbital in her system to cause immediate unconsciousness. Yet she was found in a defensive position, the pugilist pose, typical of fire victims, suggesting she was alive and reacting when the fire started. The police closed the case. They ruled it a suicide. They buried her in a zinc coffin, just in case she needed to be exhumed later. They laid her to rest in a grave without a name. This is the ultimate dead end. Not a lack of evidence, but a refusal to see it. There were rumors, of course. Whispers of the KGB. Whispers of the Mossad. Witnesses came forward claiming to have seen her with 2 men in the days before her death. They said she looked terrified. They said she tried to speak, but was silenced. The police did not interview these witnesses. Or if they did, the transcripts do not exist in the folders available to the public. In the digital archive, there is a gap. You are scrolling through the daily reports, day 1, Day 2, Day 3. The intensity is high. And then suddenly, the file stops. The next document is the closing statement. It feels like a tape has been erased. Years later, modern science tried to breach this wall. In 2017, samples were taken from the woman's teeth and bones. That zinc coffin served its purpose. Isotope analysis was performed. This is the promise of modern technology. We believe that if we just have enough data, we can solve anything. We looked at the ratio of strontium and oxygen isotopes in her enamel. The science worked. It told us where she was born. It told us she moved during her childhood. It pinpointed the border region between France and Germany. It told us she was likely in Nuremberg during the Second World War. We have the chemical map of her childhood. We know the water she drank. We know the food she ate. But we do not have her name. The science narrowed the search from the world to a specific region. But a region is still a haystack of millions. The isotopes cannot tell us who she was. They can only tell us where she stood. The dead end remains. It has just become more high definition. We are left staring at the final piece of evidence that leads nowhere. The matchbox. Found in the suitcase was a matchbox from the Beat Us sex shop chain in Germany. It was a salacious detail that the press latched onto. It suggested a connection to the underground, to erotica. But when investigators traveled to the shop, they found nothing. It was a common item. Thousands were sold. It was just a piece of cardboard. This is the sensation of the Isdal case. You pick up an object, a spoon, a tube of eczema cream, a matchbox, and it feels heavy with significance. You trace it back to its source, and it disintegrates in your hands. The spoon is just a spoon. The code is just a date. The woman is just a body. The funnel has narrowed. We have gone from the loud discovery of a burning woman to the quiet, dusty failure of the filing cabinet. The noise has stopped. The theories have been filed away. All that remains is the single, haunting detail that defies all bureaucratic explanation. The one thing that the police could not explain away. So they simply chose to ignore it. The detail that keeps this case from ever truly closing. We are now standing at the very bottom of the funnel. The light is dim, and we are left with the final, impossible question. The body burns, but the teeth endure. While the fire in Isdalen Valley destroyed the fingerprints, the face, and the soft tissue that once held a life, it could not erase the chemical signature locked inside the enamel. For 46 years, the Isdal Woman was nothing more than a police sketch and a collection of pseudonyms. She was a ghost story told to children in Bergen to keep them out of the woods. But in 2016, the Norwegian authorities reopened the cold case boxes. bypassing the paper files to interrogate the only witness that was still intact, her jawbone. This is where the investigation shifts from the chaotic, rain-soaked crime scene of 1970 to the sterile silence of a modern laboratory. We move from the macro, international espionage and missile tests, to the micro, the atomic analysis of the strontium isotopes in her teeth provided a geographic timeline that no passport could forge. Strontium is an element found in rocks and soil. It leaches into the water supply and the food chain. When a child's teeth are forming, that specific chemical signature is fossilized in the enamel. It is a biological flight recorder. The data extracted from her molars contradicted the story she told hotel clerks. She was not Belgian. She was not South African. The isotopes placed her childhood in the Nuremberg area of Germany, or perhaps the borderlands near France. As she aged, the chemical map shifted. Her second molars, formed during adolescence, pointed further west, to the chaotic, shifting borders of post-war Europe. This creates a dissonance. We have a woman who went to extraordinary lengths to sever her ties to history. She scraped the labels off her lotion bottles. She dissolved the tags on her clothing. She spoke broken English and German to confuse her origin. She used 8 different identities to travel across Europe. And yet, she carried the undeniable map of her home inside her own mouth. The biology betrayed the tradecraft. This scientific revelation narrows the funnel. We are no longer looking for a citizen of the world. We are looking for a woman born around 1930 in a specific corridor of Central Europe who was displaced as a teenager. But the science only amplifies the silence of her final weeks. The investigation uncovered that her movements in Norway were not erratic. They were precise. When mapped against the declassified military archives of the era, a pattern emerges that is too rigid to be coincidence. She was in Bergen during the testing of the Penguin anti-ship missile. The Penguin was a piece of advanced Norwegian technology, a heat-seeking missile that NATO allies were desperate to evaluate. And Soviet intelligence was desperate to compromise. The Isdal Woman's itinerary, decoded from her cryptic notepad, overlapped almost perfectly with the testing schedules of the Norwegian Navy. When the tests moved, she moved. When the fleet docked, she checked into a hotel nearby. She was a shadow cast by the military-industrial complex. Witnesses remembered her now, not as a vague figure, but as a watchful presence. A man who observed her at the Hotel Rosenkrantz recalled her sitting in the deep armchairs of the lobby, not reading, not drinking, just watching the door. He noted she changed seats to ensure her back was never to the entrance. A fisherman in the area reported seeing a woman matching her description, observing military maneuvers with binoculars. When he approached, she vanished into the tree line. This brings us to the texture of the espionage. It is not the glamour of cinema. It is the texture of waiting. It is the smell of stale cigarette smoke in a budget hotel room. It is the damp wool of a coat worn for too many days in the Norwegian rain. It is the isolation of a person who cannot speak their true name to a single living soul. The tragedy of the Isdal Woman is not just her death, but the total success of her mission to disappear. She was an operative who was perhaps burned, a term used when an agent is compromised. In the intelligence world, a burned agent is a liability. They are cut loose. The autopsy revealed a bruise on her neck that occurred before the fire. A blunt force trauma. It suggests a struggle, or perhaps a method of incapacitation. But the soot in her lungs proves she was alive when the fire began. She breathed in the smoke. The scene in the scree becomes a theater of horror. The sleeping pills found in her stomach were not fully dissolved. She had ingested dozens of phenomenal tablets, enough to sedate, perhaps not enough to kill instantly. Was she forced to swallow them, or did she take them herself, realizing there was no extraction team coming? The funnel narrows further. We move from the valley to the city of Bergen, to the disposal of what remained. Because she was never identified, because no embassy claimed her, and because the Catholic rosary found in the fire suggested a faith foreign to the Protestant majority of Norway, the police were left with a logistical problem. What do you do with a body that belongs to no one? They ordered a zinc coffin. Zinc is crucial here. It is used for sealing. It is used when a body needs to be transported across borders, or when there is a risk of contagion. It is a metal of containment. They placed the charred remains inside, soldering the lid shut. They were preserving her for a family that would never call. On February 5th, 1971, a funeral was held at the chapel of Malindal. The atmosphere of the footage from that day is grainy and gray. The sky is a flat sheet of white static. There is no music. There are no flowers from friends. The pews were empty of mourners. The congregation consisted entirely of 18 police officers from the Bergen precinct. They sat in their dress uniforms, stiff and uncomfortable, acting as the surrogate family for the woman they had failed to name. The priest delivered a generic sermon. He spoke of the tragedy of dying alone in a foreign land. He did not know that the woman in the box had likely chosen that loneliness, had curated it, had built it brick by brick with every fake passport and every burnt notebook. They carried the zinc coffin out into the freezing air. The only sound was the crunch of boots on the gravel and the distant hum of traffic from the city that had moved on. They lowered her into a grave dug in the Catholic section of the cemetery. The earth was piled on top. No headstone was commissioned. No name was carved. This is usually where a story ends. The earth settles. The grass grows. The files are boxed and moved to the basement. But the Isdal Woman did not settle. The funnel reaches its finest point. We are no longer looking at a map of Europe, or a timeline of missile tests, or a burning valley. We are looking at a specific patch of ground in Isdal Cemetery. If you go there today, you will find it easily, though you will not find her name. The cemetery is well kept. Moss grows thick on the older stones. The air smells of rain and wet granite. But the detail that lingers, the detail that prevents this from being just history, is buried 6 feet down. Standard wooden coffins decompose. Over 40 years, the wood rots, the earth collapses, and the biology returns to the carbon cycle. The skeleton mixes with the soil. But the Isdal Woman was buried in zinc. Zinc does not rot like wood. It resists the earth. It creates a hermetic seal. This means that today, right now, beneath the manicured grass of Bergen, the Isdal Woman is not dust. She is suspended in the dark, sealed inside a metal capsule that has refused to yield to time. The jawbone that holds the map of her childhood was kept in the evidence locker, but the rest of her, the soot in her lungs, the bruise on her neck, the secrets she swallowed, is still there. She is waiting. The zinc coffin acts as a time capsule of 1970. It is a bubble of cold air trapped in the ground. There is a final, haunting reality to this preservation. Because the coffin is sealed, she has never truly joined the earth. She is still distinct from the soil around her. She is still separate. Even in death, she remains an foreign object. The signal has not stopped broadcasting. It has simply been buried in a metal box. If you stand on the grass above her grave, you are standing on a locked door. And just a few feet below your boots, in the absolute dark, the Isdal Woman is still holding her breath.